Welcome to another edition of the Dakotan's Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. To see more interviews like the one you're going to see right now, you can go to mydakotan.com, click on Election Central, and there you'll see a bunch more of these. But today we are excited to be joined by North Dakota State Senator David Hogue. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
Absolutely. You've been in this since 2008. Tell us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to get into politics.
Okay, well, my background, I'm a North Dakota farm kid. Grew up on our family farm, which we still have today. It's about 8 miles north of Bismarck, along the Missouri River. Went to school in the Catholic school system in Bismarck. Went to Cornell College for my undergraduate degree. Went to UND Law School.
Okay.
At the same time, I joined the North Dakota Army National Guard and did that for 25 years.
Wow.
And met my wife at my first job. And so we got married. We moved to Minot back in 1988, practicing law since 1988.
Wow.
And raised a couple kids, and they're both adult kids now. And they're getting married this year too, so we
That's
have
exciting.
back-to-back weddings. It's
a good year to do it.
I'm gonna have to take a second job. We'll do it. We'll do it.
Yeah, that'll be difficult. So, it sounds like a pretty exciting history. Going off to Cornell, that's a little bit away from North Dakota. What made you want to come back?
Well, I've always wanted to. Like I said, I'm a farm kid. I like to be on the farm. I mean, I spend some time. I don't do the farming because it's too hard for me from Minot, but I like to get back to the farm, like to horse around. I have just enough cows that I can wear a belt buckle and say I'm a rancher. I couldn't get that out of my system. And so, I've just always wanted to come back to North Dakota.
That's neat. What inspired you to get into politics specifically?
You know what, I think it's probably the same thing that inspired me to become an attorney. I love to have discussions about policy issues.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's an interesting area for me. Right.
Absolutely. So you've been in the Senate since 2008, but you are now the Senate Majority Leader. And we hear about that in the national politics because our leaders and the minority leaders get a lot of attention.
Sure.
But in the state Senate, what does that involve as far as what's kind of the job description that goes along with that, different than just regular?
Well, I would describe the Senate Majority Leader as the leader of the Senate. It involves my favorite part is mentoring new senators who are not acquainted with the process, are not familiar with statutory laws, budgets, things of that nature. So try to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. So that there's mentorship that's involved. There's assigning people to committees, and we always try to assign people to where they want to go, because my philosophy is if you're on a committee where you want to be, you'll do a better job for the state of North Dakota.
Right.
Assigning chairmanships of those committees, making other appointments, sort of controlling the calendar and what comes to the floor and when. Interfacing with the governor's office about major policy issues where we agree and disagree. Interfacing with the other house as well, because as you know, there's two separate houses,
right? And
people, I think, have a tendency to think that they are in lockstep with one another when the reality is they're not always.
Okay.
And I could give you one example. It's just on tax relief.
Yeah.
The House is very focused, I would say, more focused on income tax relief.
Okay.
And the Senate is more focused on property tax relief.
Right.
So there's differences that have to be reconciled, and that's part of the majority leader's job.
Absolutely. One of the things you mentioned was mentorship, which brings us to an interesting question with term limits.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's something that's in effect, and we're going to start feeling the effects of that not in about 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You obviously will be, if you're reelected, you'll eventually be limited. But you only get one more time to run. This will be your last time able to be running in the Senate. You'll have served 6 years under that new law, and you can't run beyond that. How does that affect that mentorship? We're going to have a lot of fresh people coming in, and soon we're going to be losing the experience that we have. Is this something that is going to be a negative effect of the term limits of people being as experienced?
I think it will. I think it will have a negative impact. It will shift the balance of power away from the legislators as a policy-making branch, and by default, it will go to agency heads and to lobbyists. That's my feeling. And the reason I feel that way is it takes a while to get up to speed on budgets, on policy.
Right.
And what we have to remember, I feel, with legislators is it's a part-time job. We're there. You campaign in the fall, and then you get up to speed. You try to get up to speed, but you're there for 4 months.
Right.
And there is not the time to become familiar with all of the issues you need to be acquainted with. And so I think it will hurt. If I was to rewrite that constitutional provision, I would say 12 years would be better. Mm-hmm. But 8 is just too short, because if you think about it, we'll have minimum turnover of 25% every election cycle, right?
Wow.
Because every 2 years there's elections.
Yes.
And so the reason I say it's minimum, because you'll also have people that choose not to run for whatever reason, and you'll have people that are defeated. Mm-hmm. And so, as an example, the past 2 sessions without term limits impacting anyone, we had 10 new senators out of 47 last session. We know we're going to have at least 7 more.
Wow.
So over one third turnover in a 4-year cycle. That's just too much.
Right.
I mean,
without term limits.
Right. So I certainly agree that getting new blood, getting new people in is important, but when you have this mechanism that puts a minimum turnover of 25% a year, that's too much.
Right. And so then you lose that leadership. So the stuff that we don't see, you'll have a new majority leader for sure every 8 years, potentially even more often than that.
Yes.
And so you can have a lot of fresh faces there, not the mentorship. There's going to be a lot less mentorship. Is there something that you think would be important for those people that are coming in to do? Maybe get a hold of a retired or forced to be retired legislator, stuff like that?
Yeah, there are. In fact, I'm trying to implement them this interim. One of the things that I would like to implement is our legislative council. Okay, that's the full-time staff.
Okay.
We've determined that we have fewer staff members per legislator than any other state in the country.
Wow.
And what we don't have, it's a pretty small staff. We have lawyers that draft the bills for us.
Okay.
And we have fiscal people that help us write budgets and help us count the money. Mm-hmm. What we don't have are people that guide us on policy, can tell us what are other states doing in terms of this issue or that issue.
Yeah.
That's an area where I want our legislative council to grow, because I feel like we need to have someone within legislative council that young legislators can turn to for information about a specific policy issue.
Right.
And to me, that's one way to address the lack of knowledge and experience that you're likely to have when you're turning over 25% every session.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then we don't have to go into this discussion, but then you get to the part of who's actually able to run when you're looking for 25 or more people, 25% or more running every time, and the lack of flexibility you get.
Right. You're
going to turn to retirees or extremely young people that aren't into their careers yet, or things like that. Let's talk about some of the work that you've done in Congress. What are some of over the last many years, what are some of the bills or issues that you look back and like, that's something that I'm happy that I was able to help with or get into place or something along those lines?
Okay. Well, thank you for that question. I would say one of the things I'm most proud of is the drafting of the constitutional measure that created the Legacy Fund.
Okay.
I'll give you a little history because the history happens to be important. So I came into the legislature in 2009 as a green freshman.
Okay.
And the previous legislature in 2007 had put a constitutional measure on the ballot to create something like a legacy fund. The voters rejected it.
Okay.
They rejected it. And so the leadership in the legislature at that time is like, well, the people won't support the creation of a legacy fund, so forget about it. Well, we did draft something in both the House and the Senate had a version, and we couldn't agree going all the way to the end of the session. And that's where you appoint these so-called conference committees where the House and Senate get together.
Okay.
And my finance and tax chairman was Senator Dwight Cook, who just passed away. He appointed me as the chair on the Senate side because I had taken an interest in it, and I wasn't discouraged because I hadn't dealt with it previously.
Yeah.
And Representative Kim Koppelman, who was the chair of their House committee. And we formed the conference committee, and we literally drafted that, what is now the Legacy Fund, back in April of 2009.
Okay.
And that's the measure that went on the ballot that the people did adopt.
Wow.
And so I keep a careful eye on the Legacy Fund, both its earnings and folks who are trying to tap into it.
Yeah.
And I try to make sure that it serves its purpose for what we thought it should do back then.
What was some of that purpose back then when you're creating it? What was some of the purpose that you were thinking it should be used for?
Well, the primary purpose is to recognize that our natural resources, oil and gas that funds it, is a finite resource. And so if we're collecting all of this revenue off the oil and gas industry, and that revenue is going to go away someday, we ought to put it in a sovereign wealth fund that could be used for future generations.
Right.
And so that's why you saw a lot of the provisions that we didn't touch the money in the first 4 years. We can't spend the principal without a 2/3 vote.
Wow.
And so all we have access to is the earnings.
Yeah.
And so that was all calculated to make sure that fund is available in perpetuity for future generations.
Right. Very cool. Looking forward to this next session, what are some of the issues that you think are really important for North Dakota right now?
Well, a couple. I mentioned the Legacy Fund, and because now it's starting to throw off about $350 million a year,
wow.
$700 million a biennium.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see that level of income, people are very tempted to, well, I want $10 million for this project, and what I call parochial projects.
Okay.
And I'm adamantly opposed to incorporating that into the Legacy Fund earnings, spending the earnings. How we've spent it in the past, things that benefit virtually the entire state.
Yeah.
We took money to $100 million of the Legacy Fund earnings to beef up our highway construction fund because we haven't raised our gas tax since 2006. It's still at 23 cents a gallon.
Wow.
But the cost of building a road is doubled in that time.
Yeah. So
we use a Legacy Fund to help defray those expenses rather than raising taxes on everybody at the gas pump.
Right.
I guess that's one of my primary focuses. The other one is our tax structure. We're getting pushed to reform or eliminate property taxes.
Right.
And I certainly want to take a hard look at reducing the tax burden on primary residences because that seems to be where the biggest push is coming from. Yeah.
So about the tax reform or whatever it ends up being for property tax, there's obviously the in-property tax constitutional measure that is been floating around for a while. And then there's, I'm sure others, there's one that we heard of recently that will be a legislative measure to help reform it. How do you think is the best approach? Do you think doing a constitutional amendment where it's set in stone, can't be touched, or a legislative measure is the best approach for that?
I don't support constitutional measures that deal with tax structure, because tax structure is something you want to be able to change based on changing circumstances.
Right.
As an example, I would like to see the Legacy Fund double its principal in the next 10 years, and I think we can.
Okay.
We'll get up past 20 million.
Yeah.
At that point, it becomes quite a source of revenue for the state. Mm-hmm. And we might want to change our tax structure at that time. And if something's locked away in the Constitution, you're not able to do that.
Right.
We've been slowly, progressively reducing the state income tax to the point now where 60% of North Dakotans don't pay any income tax.
Right.
I think we can keep moving that, but to say to wipe it all out and then you can't ever have it again, I don't think that's sound policy.
Right. That makes sense. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges or opportunities in North Dakota in the coming years?
Well, I've just got done giving a little presentation where I have maintained that our future is incredibly bright. Mm-hmm. There's over $40 billion that want to come and invest in North Dakota if we stay on track, because there are ways to leverage our oil and gas industry.
Okay.
As an example, there's a company called Saralon that wants to build a gas to liquids plant up near Williston, make diesel fuel, clean diesel fuel, jet fuel.
Okay.
And they're going to take the excess gas that we don't have a use for in the Bakken and turn it into renewable fuels.
Wow.
Tremendous opportunity. There's two companies that are competing to build a fertilizer plant in North Dakota. These are $3-4 billion projects, and of course we import a lot of fertilizers. Our farmers can't get enough because we're not close to any source. We have one company that produces fertilizer, but it's not enough to fulfill the demand. So a lot of those large projects are really exciting. And it's just basically leveraging our energy industry. So I think our biggest challenge is to make sure we stay focused on the big picture, which is let's not let our road infrastructure, our railroad infrastructure, our electrical transmission infrastructure, and pipelines, they're all important for North Dakota because they all help us either export our raw materials or serve us in other ways that leverage what we have here.
Very good. Let's take a look at, obviously you're in a race in District 38. You guys will be having your endorsing convention here very soon. But looking at North Dakota politics and your guys' district race, how do you feel the future is? We have a lot of infighting going on, more on the state level, potentially in your local race a little bit as well, but mainly on the state level. There's a lot of infighting going on. We now have a lot of turnover, which is something that we haven't seen. We've had a lot of stability in politics in the last 10 years at least for North Dakota and for the Republican side. Do you feel like right now is a pivotal moment for politics in North Dakota? Do you feel like it's a pivotal moment for the Republican Party where changes now could have some effects down the road, or how do you feel?
Well, that's a good question. I would answer it partly. The Republican brand is a very good brand now, and I can tell that because everybody wants it.
Yeah.
Everybody who's seeking public office wants that R brand. There's very few that don't.
Right.
And so when you see these skirmishes at the district level and the state level where you have 2, 3, 4 people vying for that Republican endorsement, that tells me the brand is pretty strong.
Yeah.
And I think that's the healthy part of our party. The Republican Party is recognized as conservative. We have certain principles that we stand up for, and apparently the vast majority of North Dakotans support that. And so again, if you're If you're wanting to run for public office, you want that R.
Right. You want to go ahead and endorse anybody on the state level? I'm teasing you.
No.
I'm teasing you.
We've got outstanding candidates. I'll say that.
Right. Yeah. And it has been interesting to see names continue to fill in. And I think that was my off the wall question I was going to throw at you. Are you going to put your name in for governor or for U.S. representative? But obviously,
I got 2 weddings. I can't.
Yeah, you can't do it. Yeah. Not this time. Very fun. Very good. But let's go ahead and have some fun. Let's have some rapid fire questions. I haven't done this yet, but let's do this. So I'm just going to ask you random questions, and you answer them however you see fit.
Can I plead the fifth on
it? You can plead the fifth if you so choose. We'll start it off really hard. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Dogs. There you go.
Hunting dogs.
Hunting dogs. Yeah. What's your favorite book or author?
My favorite author is a man who's deceased. His name was William F. Buckley Jr.
Okay.
I grew up reading his columns for the National Review. He founded the National Review, a conservative magazine.
Interesting.
And he was a prolific writer, though. I mean, he wrote about politics and world affairs and just any number of things.
Yeah.
And he was, I enjoyed his writing.
See, that's the kind of stuff we don't find out until we do rapid fire stuff.
Yeah.
That's why this is important. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
It would be Jesus of Nazareth.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
What's your go-to comfort food? It's a stressful day in Bismarck. What's your go-to comfort food?
It's pizza.
It's pizza.
Yeah. Cheese. It's got to have a lot of cheese. Thin crust.
Yeah.
Pepperoni. Yeah.
Pepperoni. There you go. You finally get time for a vacation. Do you prefer mountains or beaches?
Oh, mountains.
Mountains every time.
Yeah. Big
That's
sky.
hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you enjoy skiing?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. There you go. What's your favorite musician or artist?
Well, I got to go back to high school. My favorite musician was Leonard Skinner.
Okay. Throw it back a little bit.
Yeah. I'm aging myself there, but
that's all right. What's a hobby or interest of yours that might surprise people?
Oh, I enjoy cooking.
Cooking, there you go.
Usually it's beef or, stuff on the grill, but I love cooking.
You love to cook. Favorite season?
Oh, the fall hunting season, yep.
What's a superpower? If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
To be invisible.
Invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And what's a skill you've always wanted to learn?
I have always wanted to be bilingual, and I'm not there yet. And I don't know if I'll ever get there. But I've always thought Americans are one of the few countries that really doesn't make much effort. So I've always wanted to be bilingual.
What language?
Spanish.
Spanish.
Yep.
Transitioning back to some of the more serious, I only have one or two left. Yeah, this is more fun.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Jesus of Nazareth, and it's a question that I had on my list. But our country was founded with godly influence, understanding the importance of religion, and there's even references to God in the Declaration of Independence. Do you think it's important to have godly influence when you are making policy decisions?
Yes, I do. And a lot of people, I would say, primarily on the left and media, they're uncomfortable with this notion that the legislature should sort of set the moral tone for society. But that's what legislatures do.
Yeah.
They decide, whether, an extreme example, murder is morally wrong, and so we pass laws to make that clear.
Right.
We do the same thing with life, but people aren't in agreement with that.
Yeah.
But that's what we do.
Right.
And it could come down to things like gaming and drinking and all kinds of other activities that the legislature and as the policy-making branch sort of sets the guideposts for our society, in this case, the state of North Dakota.
Would it almost be like a foundation to actually make those decisions off of? Because, I mean, in order to make a decision, you have to be tied to something, right?
Right.
whether that's just what you feel is common sense or whatever, is that something that you feel some of or majority of those decisions should be tied to?
I do. I
Yeah.
do. We're not. I don't know. I mean, it's like I suppose to a certain extent, we're all a product of where we grew up and
Yeah.
how we were educated and what our experiences are. And so I don't shy away from the idea that I grew up in the Catholic system,
Yeah.
and I've been taught to, for example, support life.
Right. Right.
So yeah,
That's awesome. How do you stay connected with your constituents and ensure that their voices are heard in the legislative process?
well, there are several ways. We're going into the campaign season that you mentioned, door to door. In terms of a campaign, that's probably my favorite activity.
Yeah.
Because you learn. That's where you learn what's important to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you, as many doors as I've knocked on over the years, I would not put property taxes as being the top thing that concerns people. They just
Yeah.
don't mention it. It's more on the issues that we were talking about, the social issues.
Right.
That's what they care about.
Yeah.
They care about protecting women's sports.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going into whose bathroom. Those social issues that
Yeah.
some people call the cultural warrior issues.
Right.
Those are the issues that people care about, and
Yeah.
that's why the legislature has been focusing on them.
Right. So combining that together, the social part and the part of that biblical foundation, what kind of, we've seen some aggression of getting protections in for people that are about bathrooms, about stuff like that. There's like this aggression to get some law passed protecting people for those decisions. Do you think it's necessary to also go and pass a law that protects the pastor? Again, I know that we already have it, but it seems like that now we're starting to get to this day and age where it's saying, well, it's not about that. That's discriminatory and you don't have protection for that anymore. Do you think there ever becomes a day, or do you think we're at a point where we need to look at it protecting those voices as well?
I think we have to evaluate how frequent and recurring is the problem, and if it's sufficiently recurring, we should address it.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. In the last session, I had folks from Grand Forks, folks from Jamestown. They sent me certain books that were in their public libraries.
Right.
That were the only way you can describe them are disgusting.
Yep.
They were books of where young boys were sodomizing other young boys, teaching one another how to masturbate.
Wow.
And it's like, okay, this can't be happening in our state.
Right.
And when you do the investigation, it was a couple of areas,
Mm-hmm.
isolated incidents, but it was more than one.
Yeah.
And the librarians were asked to remove those books or not allow them to be accessible to young people, and they declined to do that.
Okay.
So, we passed a bill
Mm-hmm.
that addressed that issue. And
Right.
of course, some people said that's book banning. It's
Yeah.
book banning. But again, we go back to what is the job of the legislature? It
Right.
is to set the moral tone for society.
Yeah.
And people cringe at that idea. But there has to be someone who puts up the guide rails.
Right.
And yes, this pornography, it was not prevalent,
Mm-hmm.
but yet it was in a couple areas where we just thought it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll ask one more question and we'll come to a close. But do you feel, when should Congress or state Congress be reactive and when should be proactive? Because obviously I think it was a very good answer, a very balanced answer you gave of we're not going to go and fight everything that's one issue at a time. Oh, that's happened once. Let's go make a law against that, right?
Right.
That would be a little bit excessive. We'd have so many laws. But then also there's stuff that comes that we don't want to have happen in the first place. Where does where should laws be made that are proactive laws, and where should they be made that are reactive?
Well, Jonathan, I tend to think we should be mostly reactive.
Okay.
Again, we're a citizen legislature.
Yep.
And my belief is we come to Bismarck, we go to Bismarck, we go away from our families, we drop our day jobs to go down there to do two things. One is to write budgets for state agencies.
Right.
And the second is to solve and address problems that are known to exist. And so if the problem has not raised itself, maybe it's happening in another state.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of trying to legislate and be proactive where the problem hasn't been shown to exist in North Dakota.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is I think it probably goes back to my military training. One of the things the Army always focused on is spend most of your time defining and identifying the problem. Because if you spend enough time in defining the problem, the solution typically will suggest itself. And where we don't have a problem, I don't support this idea of being proactive. Oh, this happened somewhere else, so we got to react. Because another part of it is, frankly, we don't have the time. Yeah.
There's a lot of bad guys in the world, and they're not all at our door.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today. It's been a great discussion. I enjoyed the rapid fire questions.
Yeah, that
was a
fun.
good time.
That was fun.
Lastly, if somebody wants to reach out to you or support you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Just call me at 852-0381.
There you go. Phone number right there. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been another episode of the Dakotans Election Central, where we are comprehensively covering the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. Be sure to go to mydakotan.com, click Election Central, where you will find other interviews just like the one you just watched. Stop by Facebook, like and subscribe there. Stop by our YouTube channel, like and subscribe. Become part of the Dakota community. We'd love to have you. Thank you, and have a great day.